When this Hollywood hotshot was at the top of his game in movies like 9.5 Weeks and Angel Heart, he looked like he had it all.
For about 3 years, he was the hottest thing on earth.
Hollywood loved him. All over the world, men wanted to be him, and women, well, they just wanted him. So why did the 80s favourite bad boy get dumped by Hollywood, and in the process, lose everything he had?
People actually say, hey, didn't you used to be in the movies? I go, Jesus Christ.
And after a lost decade of punch-ups, extraordinary plastic surgery, and burning every bridge in Tinseltown, can he really make a comeback? Mickey, how are you?
I guess you're the man, huh?
Well, you're the man. I've never felt quite so apprehensive before interviewing anybody, yeah. I said to somebody who knew you, and I said, well, what's he like, Mickey Rourke? They said, he's just dangerous.
No, it's not, it's just...
Do you feel dangerous these days, Mickey?
No. I'm okay.
I mean, on a scale of probability, what is the chance of you hitting me in this interview?
Well, it depends what you say.
That's what worries me.
Yeah.
I love your bar.
This is my friend's bar, Socialista. It's where I come to relax.
And you just hang out here?
Yeah, it's pretty low-key. It's close by, and the guy that owns the place is my best friend.
Let's go back to the start, Mickey. Talk to me very quickly about your upbringing. You were born in New York. The exact year appears to be something of a mystery.
Well, that's because, you know, like in athletics or the business I'm in, they use that against you, so I don't talk about it.
So you've never really revealed your real age?
No, but that's something I'm not going to talk to you about either.
It's part of movie star mystique, is it?
Well, it's like, you know, as soon as a running back in the NFL hits 30 years old, they're over. So they put a stigma on it. So I don't really think it matters.
Describe to me your upbringing. How would you describe it?
My upbringing. Well, you know, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but let's say if I had a choice of living where I grew up and having to do it all over again, I'd prefer not to have been born at all.
Really?
How's that sound? Yeah.
That sounds quite dramatic.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of things that went on that I'm not even comfortable talking about. It was just unusual. It was very violent. It was crazy.
I mean, you were born in New York,
Yeah.
and at the age of 7, your mother just took you to Miami.
Right.
You didn't really know what was going on, but your
Right.
father was no longer part of part of your life.
Sure.
And you got a stepfather.
Right.
And you were abused, you and your brother, through this period. Would that be a fair way of describing
No,
what
there was craziness going on.
But it was violent.
It was very violent, yeah.
And you were beaten.
Well, I started saying this stuff. I don't even want to talk about that. You know, it was the guy. It was a very crazy situation, and it was nutty.
I think what he went through as a child was very heavy. He never got over his mother leaving his father and following her mother to Florida, to an area that was very different, and losing his father.
Being brought up in a step family with 4 new brothers and a policeman's stepfather was tough on the young Rourke.
When he was 7 years old, this was a very sensitive little boy who was wide-eyed and very trusting and not knowing how to protect himself at all.
People saying, "Oh, he's a mad drunk or he's a druggie," you know, fuck you. You know, that's a very easy hook to just label you if they don't know the real deal. You know, I lived in a house where my mother turned her head to everything that was going on, and a lot of shit was going on. And, you know, you don't realize it till you're older that, you know, the shit sticks with you. And to the extent that it stuck with me, I had no clue.
Growing up in a rough Miami neighborhood had toughened Mickey, and although he loved sport, particularly boxing, he was failing in the classroom. So when he left school in the early 70s, the now streetwise Rourke gravitated towards the lowlifes and petty criminals of South Beach. He may well have joined their ranks permanently had it not been for a sudden whim. At the age of 19, with no other real prospects, he moved to the artistic hub of New York with a vague, uninformed plan to become an actor. Did you see acting as an escape route? Was it something you'd always wanted to do? How would you describe your attraction to the world of acting?
I was actually planning on a career in boxing, and I got hurt at a very young age, where I had to take a year off because of a couple of concussions, and I kind of segued accidentally into the acting thing, and then I found it kind of interesting. You know, I was living in some hotel in the village, and there was an older man there, and he would give me books to read, and sort of I found the books interesting.
Like many aspiring actors, Mickey took cheap rooms at the Hotel Marlton in Greenwich Village, where he was befriended by theatre enthusiast Carl Montgomery.
I was the night manager of the Hotel Marlton when Mickey checked in, and he was there for about 3 years during the period when we first really got to know each other quite well.
Carl took him to see plays and gave him biographies and books about acting, which Mickey devoured.
There's something in my instincts told me that he was going to be one of the finest actors of that period. I really felt that he had the potential, and I never felt that way about anyone else.
As you read about it, what did you begin to think about the profession, about Hollywood, about movies?
My favorite actors back then were like, you know, Charles Bronson, you know. I didn't know who Marlon Brando was or Montgomery Clift, or,
really?
You know, no, I had no clue. And then this guy would give me these biographies to read and other things, and then I'd go, oh, this is what it's about.
Encouraged by friends like Carl Montgomery, Mickey began to apply himself. His dream was to become a member of the Actors Studio, the prestigious home of method acting, famous for introducing the world to movie legends such as Marlon Brando and James Dean. But the ex-Miami Beach bum was far from ready for that. So, for 6 years, he worked 2 or 3 jobs at a time and paid for private tuition with Actors Studio drama coach Sandra Seacat.
He wanted private sessions, and he would come for privates and give me a handful of cash. And I found out several years later that sometimes he wouldn't eat for 2 or 3 days in order to pay me.
The Actors Studio's method requires students to dig deep into their own emotional experience and relationships. And for his entrance audition, Sandra suggested his most difficult challenge.
I had to do a scene where I'm talking to my father, and I couldn't relate to a father because I didn't see mine since I was 6, but I had missed him, you know, and I always had stuff in my head about him. So Sandra said to me, she says, how badly do you want to get into the Actors Studio? And she knew I really wanted to get in there. She says, you're going to have to go find your father. Fuck, you know. So I actually went to find him and found him the day before I did the test. And then I was able to relate to somebody that, other than some kind of beast.
I mean, you actually went into a bar.
Yeah.
And there he was.
Yeah.
You knew exactly who he was.
I went into a restaurant where I remember he and I used to go at White Castle and have hamburgers. And he happened to be sitting in the place that I walked in.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a freakish coincidence.
Yeah.
And how was the first moment of the reunion?
I followed him out on the street, and I walked up next to him, and I just stepped down on the curb. And I said, are you so-and-so? And he said, yeah. And I said, no, I'm so-and-so. And he said, oh, I always knew you'd come by one day.
Is that what he said?
And then we went to this bar, and he bought me a dinner, and he had 20 screwdrivers, and he gave me $50, and I left and did my test the next day.
Did you ever see him again?
No, he died about a year later. He drank himself to death.
Stunned by the intensity and honesty of his performance, the audition panel at the Actors Studio inducted the awkward young Rourke immediately. There are some great people there, some great young actors.
Yeah. I walked in, I couldn't believe it. I see Al Pacino and, you know, Harvey Keitel and Chris Walken, and I'm going, fuck, this is the place, man.
Did you feel suddenly electrified by this?
I really did, yeah.
And that was thrilling, to have Mickey then to be a member of my artistic home. But I just said one day, film is really important for you.
His talent had blossomed in New York, but if Mickey was to become an international movie star, he was going to have to head west. You then make the move to Hollywood.
Yeah.
Talk me through that. I mean, this is... Yeah, exactly. I mean, in an odd way, everything is sort of going downhill after that. But, I mean, when you were making that move, it must have been, to you at the time, the great dream.
Well, my acting teacher forced me to do that because I was still having a hard time walking in and communicating with somebody I didn't know. I'd go in sometimes at casting sessions and there wouldn't be a word said. They go, okay, well, thank you very much, you know? So that process was not easy for me. That's something at the studio. They didn't teach that. They didn't teach the politics. They didn't teach the business side. And I wasn't educated or sophisticated or experienced enough to understand that it was a business and that it was political.
But that is quite significant for you because there's no doubt as your career went on, the big barrier for you was that you were not particularly savvy about the way Hollywood really works.
No, I had no clue. And if I could do it all over again, I would have paid more attention to that.
So you touched down on a place that you don't really like, but you realise it's the centre of your world. You've got to be there to play.
Well, I was bouncing in a transvestite nightclub. I mean, it was like that was my job, you know. And back then, all the transvestites were on this shit called angel dust. So you'd hit them over the head with a baseball bat, and they keep on coming, you know.
So things are going well. You're a bouncer in a transvestite nightclub.
Yeah, and then I got a job. I finally got the Body Heat movie.
Yeah, which was a big film.
Yeah, and
when they actually said you've got the job, I mean, you must have been.
Well, I went in. Yeah,
stunned, weren't you?
Well, they offered me a certain amount of money, and I said, no, fuck that. I said, I want such and such. And my agent said, Mickey, every young actor in Hollywood wants this part. I said, I still want this much money. He goes, you're working in a transvestite nightclub. I said, I don't give a fuck. And they gave me the extra $500 that I asked for. But
by doing that, you would have immediately put their backs up, right? You'd immediately signal yourself as trouble.
I think that was the beginning of the end. The beginning was the beginning of the end.
You just wouldn't play the game.
I wouldn't compromise. Not after now that I could say, after what I had been through, there was no compromising with anybody, under any circumstances.
Because of your upbringing?
Yeah.
And your agent thought you were just being ridiculous?
Couldn't understand that in a million years.
But you got the money?
Got the money.
And what was it like making that first big film?
I went, man, if this is what they call acting, I'll be here for a long time. I thought it was...
You loved it?
Yeah, but it was easy.
It was comfortable to do?
It was easy. Yeah, it was a walk in the park.
Anytime you try a decent crime, you got 50 ways you can fuck up. If you think it's 25 of them, then you're a genius. And you ain't no genius.
There's a small part he plays in Body Heat, which is just extraordinary. It's a tiny, tiny part, and it's just utterly mesmerizing.
You remember who told me that? Hey, no smoking in here.
He was doing stuff that no actor at the time was doing.
I wouldn't even be on the street if it wasn't for you.
And to me, it was just fresher and dangerous.
After his small but attention-grabbing role in Body Heat in 1981, the offers came thick and fast. In the first half of the 80s, Mickey clocked up a string of great movie performances. In Diner, alongside other newcomers like Kevin Bacon and Steve Guttenberg. Coppola's Rumblefish with Matt Dillon. And The Pope of Greenwich Village with Eric Roberts and Daryl Hannah. The press were calling this fresh group of young actors the Brat Pack. And their leader was the dark, brooding Mickey Rourke, who was being hailed as the next Brando.
He's an artist that's constantly giving the audience an aesthetic arrest. That's rare.
The initial Mickey that I saw in Diner was a really cool young movie star, and was the coolest looking guy I've ever seen.
Creative people like Adrian Lyne on 9.5 Weeks, and Barry Levinson and Alan Parker got it, and got it quick, and had to have them.
He had a sort of roughness around the edges, which just made his sort of appearances on screen so powerful and kind of very sexy.
So after Body Heat, things are going well for you. The offers start coming in, the movies are there, and you become, for want of a better phrase, the next hot thing in Hollywood. What is that experience like?
All hell broke loose.
Did you feel like the shackles were off?
Yeah.
I'm a young movie star, it's happening, and I'm going to love every second.
Yeah, I did. I had a crazy time.
And it was literally just, I mean, I hope the answer is relentless sex, drugs, and rock and roll, was it, Mickey?
Absolutely, yeah.
The ex-Miami Beach bum had come a long way. He'd married his first love, fellow actor Deborah Fewer, in 1981. But by the mid-80s was living the indulgent life of a movie star bachelor. He was being paid huge amounts of money, but spending it just as fast, buying a beautiful home in Beverly Hills and spreading it around his growing entourage. When you're hot in Hollywood, you can do whatever you want. And Mickey did. You have obviously this tag, Hellraiser. How much of a party boy were you? What was the reality of a night out with Mickey Rourke in those days?
It was out of control. It was different places to go every night, beautiful women.
A lot of drugs?
No, I was wasn't really, never really got into the drugs that much. Later on, dabbled in some shit, but it was never about the drugs. You know, it was just going out and chasing the pussy.
And were you good at it?
Depends on what movie you had out.
Which was the best pulling movie you ever made? Must be 9.5 Weeks, right?
Probably.
I mean, how many women did you have on the back of 9.5 Weeks?
Enough.
The super stylish erotic tale of obsession was Rourke's first romantic lead, and co-star Kim Basinger. Nudity, explicit sex scenes, featuring a blindfold and the contents of a fridge, prove that strawberries and whipped cream can be used, well, for more than just trifle.
That was outrageously sexy and turned him from a sort of indie cool guy student favourite into a housewife's favourite. You know, everyone wanted a piece of Mickey Rourke.
The film was the cultural phenomenon of 1986. The soundtrack dominated the airwaves, and whether they'd seen it or not, everybody was talking about its sizzling stars.
Well, I remember going to the first British press screening for 9.5 Weeks, and I remember afterwards the reaction of all the journalists, and everyone was convinced that he was going to be a star, but every woman just was jaw on the floor because they couldn't get over how sexy he was. He was a real sort of Paul Newman, James Dean, Richard Gere type sex symbol.
I mean, I remember that film vividly. I mean, it played a massively helpful part in my squiring, as we called it in England at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, every woman wanted to be associated with Mickey Rourke.
Yeah.
Every bloke wanted to be like you. It was the dream role for you, really.
I didn't know that at the time.
Are you proud of that movie?
I don't know. I don't think about that movie.
Why?
Probably because there's not a day goes by that somebody doesn't come up and mention it.
It's the one defining film.
Yeah, guys will bring it up in the street, usually when they're drunk. Oh man, when I, oh God, I got to hear this again, you know.
What's the most repetitive question you get on 9.5 Weeks?
What do you think?
I've got a fair idea.
Yeah, okay.
Go on.
And I say no.
Out of a league of many young hopefuls, it was Mickey Rourke who stood out. It wasn't just his acting ability. Everything about him had a kind of 80s X factor that the media lapped up.
If you think of the sort of reinvention of Levi's, Budweiser, 1950s Americana iconography, that was big, really big. And the industry wanted a sort of face to put to that. And that was Mickey Rourke. Not only was he very sort of acceptable in a sort of Matt Dillon way, he was cute, but he was tough. He was a proper film star. For about 3 years, he was the hottest thing on earth.
339, take one.
Mickey followed up 9.5 Weeks with Angel Heart, a movie directed by Sir Alan Parker.
When he looks low-key, he's even in control. You know, it's like he makes her a very relaxed set.
Acting opposite Robert De Niro.
It wasn't like two actors at all. It was like two prize fighters. You know, not a physical jab, but a wisecrack or an ad lib or something. So Mickey was never gonna be beaten in the ring by De Niro because it meant a lot to him. He said, "I want to prove that I'm as good as he is." He used to say it to me every day we did a scene.
So you were living the movie star dream.
Yeah.
Did it feel as good as you hoped it might be?
Yeah. But as success came, the anger came, and be more defiant came, and more destructive with demanding, you know.
How did that evolve?
Easily. It was just there. It just appeared.
You felt that it was almost, you come into a very insincere world.
Well, it was like I couldn't pick up a check. I couldn't pay for a fucking drink.
Everything was thrown in your way.
Yeah.
And rather than enjoy it, you actually felt resentful because...
In the beginning, I did enjoy it, but as time went by, it brought something up in me that I didn't know what it was.
And how did it manifest itself in terms of the business, in terms of the movie making?
Just an arrogant defiance, and you know, I didn't have any clue about how to handle myself in a responsible, professional way. That all went out the window because I thought I can act, and that's all that counts.
With questionable judgment, he put art above profit and turned down a lead role in several popcorn classics. He passed on Top Gun, Beverly Hills Cop, Rain Man and Platoon, and by doing so he handed Cruise and his other Brat Pack stablemates blockbuster careers. While they were counting the cash, he was struggling to make his mortgage payments. So around this time, your life, although it appears to be at an all-time high, is quite quickly unraveling.
Disintegrating, yeah.
And the central reason is that the anger's come back, the resentment, and your complete refusal to compromise to Hollywood politics. You just will not.
You know, it wasn't so much the politics, it was anything that was an authoritarian type figure. You know, if someone looked at me sideways, I would go berserk.
In 1986, Mickey Rourke hit the UK to make his first big flop, controversial IRA movie, Prayer for the Dying. And when things didn't go his way, he publicly slated the film and its producer, Sam Goldwyn Jr. That, coupled with his outspoken views on the Northern Irish Troubles, created a tabloid scandal that tainted his reputation forever.
Prayer for the Dying was a strange thing for him to do. We were kind of surprised that he took it. There's this kind of Irish connection that he has. His politics were a bit wishy-washy. He wasn't really that aware of the situation. So I think he annoyed a lot of people in Ireland because he took positions which he probably hadn't really studied.
I mean, were you being deliberately provocative, do you think?
I don't want to get into it.
Give me the headline.
Just political stuff. It's really a subject that I don't talk about anymore. I learned my lesson.
It was about the IRA, right?
Yeah.
You were being sympathetic to the IRA.
I don't know. I was being sympathetic toward my character, and it got blown out of proportion. And I wasn't educated enough in any way to handle the consequences of what was, you know, something very volatile at the time.
In what way?
Well, getting banned from the UK, and I didn't realize that if the UK didn't buy your film, you know, wouldn't take your films, that you could hardly work.
I mean, you even took on publicly Samuel Goldwyn,
yeah,
which is sort of sacrilege in Hollywood. I mean, when you did that, did you realize what you were really doing?
Yeah.
Do you regret that?
Not so much taking on him. I don't really give a fuck about him. It was other things that happened that I allowed to happen that caused me difficulty. There were consequences.
I mean, Mickey, everyone loved him. He was the bad boy. He was outspoken. But then he picked a fight with Hollywood royalty in the form of Sam Goldwyn Jr. And that was it. He was out. You can't do that.
There is an unwritten rule in film that you're all in it together. It's pretty hard to make a film, even a bad one. And actors are the ones who end up on the chat shows and doing the interviews. So they're in a very cocky position. And actually what they're doing is slugging off the work of 100 people.
If you've made someone a star, if you've made someone rich and famous and comfortable, if you've given them a career and they turn around 5 minutes later and start abusing you, they don't like it. Why would you?
The general rule is if you don't like the movie, then you just shut up. And unfortunately, Mickey didn't.
The press had smelt blood and were now baying for more. So the industry, who had clearly also had enough of the bad boy protege, removed any protection they'd afforded him and let him have it. Open season was declared on Mickey Rourke's reputation.
If he'd have been difficult and was making hit movies, he'd still be a star these days. But because his movies weren't hits, and he was becoming increasingly difficult, he was dropped.
As the 80s croaked, so did Mickey's career. The top scripts in Hollywood were no longer landing on his lap. His Tinseltown home was repossessed. and he was in no position to be choosy about the work he could get.
If you look at the work that then followed, he got more and more difficult, and the work was not so great either.
Some of the roles that he was in, they're almost unwatchable. I mean, I sat there groaning sometimes.
In 1990, he makes Wild Orchid. With his first marriage over, Mickey makes ex-model co-star Carrie Otis his second wife. An occasion of a tabloid celebration, not with Mickey in the picture. Their tempestuous relationship would drag Rourke's name even further into the mud.
There was drugs and guns going off and fights. They were always doing something scandalous, and every week they were tabloid fodder.
You did, through this period, get married to Carrie.
Yeah.
Who was possibly the love of your life?
Yeah.
Do you still feel that way?
Yeah.
What happened there?
I met somebody who was as damaged as me, and all hell broke loose. And she was wild and crazy, and
Two damaged,
yeah,
fiery people colliding.
yeah.
Did it ever stand a chance, really, do you think?
Not at that time. Now I look back at it, I wouldn't be here talking to you right now today if she probably didn't leave. It forced me to change, because I didn't feel I had to change or needed to change.
I think Mickey Rourke's lowest point was probably, when he was with Carrie. He kind of had a bit of a personal breakdown, ended up being carted off to a sort of an institution for a while, came out and allegedly beat up Carrie, and she went to the police. And she never did press charges, but he was tarred with that brush of a wife beater. And that was kind of where it all went totally wrong for him.
There were stories of assault and abuse and all the rest of it, that you were whacking her around. Is that fair?
No.
It didn't happen?
No.
How would you describe your relationship?
She got fucked up on heroin. The only destruction that I did was on a couple of guys that she was getting high with. Problem, the bad choice that I made is I just walked into a public place and did my business with them.
And what would your business be?
I just put the guy in a hospital for a few days, and that got in the papers and stuff like that. As far as any violence that happened with her, she can't even remember it because she was so whacked out. So.
Do you remember it?
No, I don't remember it because I wasn't involved in it, because these were people that were supplying her with stuff, and they ended up doing the business, and I took the fall.
I mean, very hurtful to you to even now have to be asked about that kind of thing.
Not really, because it's never been resolved. She can't remember it. She was in such a funk. I mean, I think she knows, because she told me the name of the people that did it.
And do you still see her?
No. I have nothing against her. I still care about her, and, if she needed my help, I'd be there for her, but I think she's doing fine.
Have you been in love since?
In love? No.
Do you think you will?
I don't know. She was a hell of a woman and a lot to match up to, so something had to fall out of the fucking sky.
Do you think you'll ever be able to move on, probably?
From her? Probably not.
That's tough.
I'm tough.
So you're banned from Britain.
Yeah.
You've fallen out with the Hollywood hierarchy. You're now tainted as trouble. And
I think so.
yeah. And in typical Mickey Rourke fashion, your reaction is spectacular. You just say, what?
I just got on my motorcycle and kept riding.
But you retreated back to where you'd started,
Yeah.
boxing.
Yeah.
I mean, a startling thing to do.
Yeah, I had realized at 34, I had some demons about when I got hurt as an amateur, and I never turned pro, and I went, you know what, I'm going to take...
It was unfinished business.
Yeah, it was unfinished business that I felt bad about.
And what was the reaction to your decision?
Well, I was only going to do it for a year. I didn't realize it was going to go on for 5 years.
You must have had everyone trying to persuade you to
Oh,
stop.
yeah. Well, everyone had left by that time.
There's no one left to persuade you.
Everybody abandoned ship. It was just me.
Stories started filtering through that, you know, Mickey Rourke was this boxer, which I just thought, why? You know, he was a megastar. He was massive in Hollywood. You know, why has he done this?
A lot of actors go off the rails and don't become professional boxers.
I think he thought that being an actor was a bit of a wimpy thing to do, and he wanted to sort of get real and be gritty and show everyone that he was a tough guy. But it was quite sad because it just backfired because he wasn't very good at it.
He was somebody who didn't need to be bashed around the head.
Mickey Rourke boxed professionally from 1991 until 1994.
I watched Mickey's last 2 fights, and I just wanted to die for him. I think at the time he was like 40, and he was boxing. And I watched him get his ass kicked and wonder, why is he doing this? And then I realized that Mickey is the kind of guy who comes from nothing. So everything is an accomplishment. I think he could have saved a lot of wear and tear on the old face because he got pummeled. But look, how many guys have done that? And he's done it.
Did it give you a bigger rush than you've been getting from movies?
Yeah.
So that's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's something I've always enjoyed sports much more than making movies.
So while everybody else thought you'd gone mad, abandoning your Hollywood career for getting back in the ring, for you it seemed an obvious thing to do.
Well, it was like I wanted to do it one more time before I became like a fucking geriatric. You know, I wanted to compete one more time at a high level. And went as far as I could up until I started getting some memory loss. And I failed my neurological twice, and they said, you should stop right now. And I had just gotten offered they said if you win 3 more fights, you can move up to cruiserweight and fight for a WBO title fight. So, I mean, that's all I thought about. And then I told the doctor, and I said, how much are they going to pay you? And I said, well, I mentioned the figure. He says, you won't even be able to count that if you have 3 more fights.
Really?
Yeah.
Would winning a WBO title have meant more to you than winning an Oscar?
Yes.
You see, in that answer, I get what it's all about.
Yeah.
I don't think you were mad. It was your passion.
Yeah.
You just happened to be a guy who loved his boxing, who happened to be very good at acting.
Yeah.
When you tried to come back to movies,
Yeah.
I mean, the game had moved on for you.
It was gone, yeah.
I mean, apart from anything else, your face had been pretty badly mangled.
Well, you know, I had 5 nose operations. It broke my cheekbone. I had 2 concussions, broke my hand. My hands just never be the same, probably.
But what it did, the boxing years, it took a famously handsome face
Right.
and turned you into a bit of a train wreck.
Right.
I remember sort of this picture landing on the showbiz desk, and we were like, has he gone mad? Why? He was gorgeous.
He already had the most brilliant, wonderful, characterful face. What on earth would anybody want to do that? It's a complete and utter mystery to me.
The late 90s saw the rise of the weekly gossip magazine that signalled a new age of intrusion and celebrity bashing. A regular page filler born out of this was the When Plastic Surgery Goes Wrong feature, and their poster boy, well, it was Mickey Rourke.
The plastic surgery, it's a way out of it. It's embarrassing almost. It's embarrassing. It's so bad. If you're going to do it, do a good job.
The press thought the surgery looked more than just reconstructive.
It struck me that he was trying to change himself, wasn't he? Become something new, you know, like a butterfly, but failed.
I saw him at something in London not long after he'd had it done, the first bout, and it was sort of truly terrifying, you know, frighten the children.
I've noticed since I've worked in Hollywood that there is this ludicrous obsession with how you look, with all things aesthetic.
Right, right.
Do you care that you get regularly dissected now as plastic surgery feature? Here's Mickey Rourke. And
No, I mean, if I had, you know, stuff blown out of proportion about operations I've had on injuries, I don't read it. I don't give a fuck what somebody has to say. That town built on envy, so they're going to say what they want to say and believe what they want to believe.
But when you try to get movie parts again, presumably then it mattered.
I think my reputation at the time was so devastatingly bad that my movie career was pretty much over before I left to go back to boxing.
When you finished the boxing, I've read some quite a harrowing account from you of your life, the sort of life in the wilderness for 10 years, where you had no money,
Right.
you had no real friends to count, didn't have much to get up for other than your dogs. And probably the most sort of sad moment for me when I read your story was how you would try and get tables in restaurants and
Yeah, the ones where you couldn't pay, before you couldn't pay for a drink.
Yeah.
And I remember going off on some guy one time when I couldn't get a table in a place. And I said, what's the matter? I don't have a fucking movie out this week, you know? Where I would say it's worse to be a has-been than to like never have been anything before. Because when somebody goes like, what happened to you? You know, like people would actually say, I'd be standing in a 7-Eleven buying a pack of cigarettes. And the guy would say, hey, didn't you used to be in the movies? There's like 6 people in line. I'm going, yeah, a long time ago. And then somebody, oh, you're Mickey Rourke. I go, Jesus Christ, I think. And, you know, it was like, you know, going through that kind of thing.
Did all this behaviour, the restaurants not giving you tables, all that kind of thing?
Well, it was only one time.
But did it confirm to you what an insincere, shallow place Hollywood is, really?
Not really, because by that time I was talking to a guy who was kind of helping me put the pieces back together.
This is the therapist you saw?
Yeah, and I realized that it wasn't any producers or anybody in Hollywood. I'm the one that brought the curtain down on myself. You know, I jumped off the mountain head first.
I mean, it was one of the great self-implosions in Hollywood history. Listening to you, it seems obvious to me that very destructive childhood almost certainly cost you your career,
right?
Your marriage,
yeah,
your fortune. I mean, every good thing that came your way, in the end, got chewed up by the damage that was there.
I don't like to use it as a crutch. What I'm using as a crutch is the damage that came out of it. Damaged me in a way that I couldn't function without self-destructing and ruining what I was trying to achieve. And the hardest thing for me is, it's like when my ex-wife said to me, you know, you have to change, you know? And then I realized, man, I gotta change, or I might as well just blow my fucking brains out.
Did you ever think of blowing your brains out?
Sure.
You actually had moments when you thought, I'm going to kill myself?
Well, let's just say, you know, it crosses your mind.
How would you have done it?
I have no idea. But you see, because my kid brother was sick with cancer his whole life, trying to live, there was a big part of me, I wouldn't do it because mainly because of him. You know, because he would fight so much to beat his illness and want to be alive, and I'm going to sit there and blow my fucking brains out. No, I wouldn't. There's no fucking way I'd do it. Mainly because of him.
Was Joey the one person you were closest to in your life?
Yeah.
And was his death the most difficult thing you've ever had to deal with?
Yeah. Yeah. When it's your brother and he's dying, you know, he's in your arms and you see the light go out. You know, that was you know, people could say, oh, death is a beautiful thing. It's a lonely, ugly, terrifying, horrible thing. There's no beauty about it at all.
Do you think he'd have been proud of the way that you've pulled yourself back together?
Well, you know, Joe died about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, and I remember him saying, hey, bro, he said, you changed, man. I never thought you did. And I'm sitting there looking at him, and he's dying, and he's very happy to see the change.
By the turn of the century, it looked increasingly unlikely that filmmakers were ever going to consider the Hollywood has-been for anything again. But movies had changed, and the people making them had changed too.
Filmmakers like Mr. Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino grew up admiring Mickey Rourke. Those people are not dancing to somebody else's tune, and neither is Mickey. So they can make music together, for sure.
In 2005, hot movie director Robert Rodriguez transferred the graphic novel Sin City to the big screen and cast Mickey as serial-killing anti-hero Marv. The film was a success, and introduced a whole new generation to Rourke's, albeit prosthetically challenged, on-screen talent.
Sin City was certainly his best role in years, in a very, very long time.
I was so pleased because thank God he had a good role for a change.
I was fascinated by him in Sin City, to see how strange he looked. Pretty special, I think, in a weird way.
But did it feel good to be back?
You know, people say that to me, and it's like when you've been out of work 13 years, you don't ever feel like you're back.
What does it feel like?
I don't know. I think in the beginning, I think when you're really young and you first start out and you hit and things are going smooth, you know, you're there and it's never going to go away. And then when it goes away, you know, maybe it goes away for 6 months or a year, but after, you know, a decade, you know, you start to go, maybe they're right, maybe I am through.
Do you feel fortunate to be back making movies at all?
After what I did to everybody, yeah.
And can you enjoy it more this time?
I do, yeah, I really do.
You feel less anger, less resentment?
Oh, I don't feel any at all.
Now you're actually enjoying making
Well,
films?
because I realized I was the monster,
Not everybody else.
not these people I was screaming at in the dark to come out and fucking get it on.
With plans in place for a Sin City 2, Mickey's Marv may well be back, and his latest role in The Wrestler is tipped to be the best work of his career.
He closed off his future with his plastic surgery because he became funny looking. And then his plastic surgery relaxed and he looks like Mickey Rourke again. So I think his future is wide open and I think he's gonna blow all of our minds.
He's probably got the redemptive role in him, like Brando when he did The Godfather.
He's on his way back, and you know why he's on his way back? Because he was always great. And he looks kind of strange, but it doesn't matter. In a weird way, it doesn't matter because inside is a phenomenal actor, and he always was. And I think that if he's doing well right now, that's the reason. He's just a really, really good actor.
I mean, would you like to have a movie big enough now to stop the endless procession of people coming up to you and talking about 9.5 weeks?
You know what? The 9.5 week thing doesn't really. It's almost. It doesn't anger me, or it's almost embarrassing. Because it's like I don't get it, you know.
I mean, do you feel a huge pressure when you're with a woman now to produce fruit and stuff?
No.
Do they try and exert that pressure, you know,
No, not
for
at
old
all.
time's sake?
No, not at all. No. No, the women I'm with these days don't even remember that movie.
Mickey, I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's great to have you back.
Thank you. It's great to be back for another drink. Cup of coffee.
Very nice. Very nice, boy.